So if you have ever come up with those person who are working with the metal pieces and joining together by means of welding, you may think that this is the easiest job that I could ever done. If you are then you're pretty much wrong, because welding is not as easy as you think, because it's having the capacity to alter the material property that could potentially cause the failure of the weldments. So we need to understand what's going on under the hood, and how to address such problems from happening, all in greater detail. So I have picked up one most important issue that welders usually face while welding stainless steels. That's called weld decay or weld sensitization. So before going on to see about what's about weld decay, let's first clarify about what's welding. The least I could say about welding is that it's a process where metals are coalesced together and make them or let them solidify by nucleating grains. So this is where most of the problems come in, because nucleating grains is not a matter of fact, because it's have the capability to alter or control the material properties. So we need to take control over it and have the sound weld. So I am kind of digressing. So straight away get down to the topic. So stainless steel, as you may know about stainless steel, it's a kind of steel that offers corrosion resistance. The corrosion, the corrosion is a dangerous thing that the steels could have, because corrosion could potentially weak the steels and lead to the failure of the components. So we need to address the corrosion, and for that we are using stainless steel, because these steels are mainly used in marine applications. That's where the pitting corrosion and many type of corrosion happens. So during welding stainless steels, we need to pay more attention to that welding process. Otherwise, the, the very property of corrosion resistance of stainless steel will get lost. So you may get what I'm saying. So why this is causing and how this is happening, let's see. So basically, as you know about metals, it's containing grains and grain boundaries. Grain boundaries are having what's called this is the grain boundary, and this grain boundary having the misalignment. What I could say is that these two grains are these two grains are locally meeting at this point and having a alignment that is slightly off with those grains, right? So we have the dangling bonds, and the dangling bonds raise the energy of the grains. You can say that the energy of the overall system increases due to the presence of the grain boundaries, right? So these grain boundaries could potentially increase the energy of the overall system. So nature always tends to lower energy systems. So nucleation, all that process happens in grain boundaries. So this is the very reason that nucleation always happens in grain boundaries. So as far as chromium, that is stainless steels, the corrosion resistance is imparted by the presence of chromium, right? That chromium tends to form what's called the oxide layer, that is self-healing in nature, which means if you scrap off some chromium oxide, and the chromium present inside the metal will diffuse out of the metal and forms chromium oxide, fresh chromium oxide around the metal piece, and that could potentially, what I could say is that could potentially raise the corrosion resistance of the metal, right? During welding, what's happening is that during welding we are having zones. That is, this is the zone that actual welding take place, and beside that zone we are having heat affected zones. So heat affected zone, as you may see, the temperature is slightly less compared to those those regions where the local coalescence happening. So in that zone, the temperature is higher. So what's following is that the carbon atom tends to diffuse and having the diffusibility. So diffusion is a exponential function of temperature, right? And the diffusion happens at that temperature and combines with chromium in that region and forms what's called the chromium carbide. That chromium carbide will potentially lock up the chromium in place and leads to the deficient of chromium in the weldments along the grain boundaries. So So this is the grain boundary, and in that grain boundary and nearer to that grain boundary, there is a deficit in chromium content. So what following is that the corrosion resistance is lost. So the metals in that region will potentially corrode and cause what's called the weld decay or failure of the component, and this is aggravated in the presence of the liquid medium, acidic medium, alkaline medium, and something like that. So in marine environments, we are having chloride ions. That chloride ions will diffuse and cause chloride pitting corrosion and all that happening due to this process. So we need to address this. So how do we address this? By adding titanium and nickel, we are reducing the capability of chromium to form a chromium carbide. So that could potentially benefit us by not corroding that metal part along the grain boundaries. So this is called a stabilized stainless steels. What's called the stabilized stainless steels or stabilized SS, right? So another